everybody. I first met James Lankford in 2011 when he was part of the historic class of 2010. And we'll focus for a second on Senator Lankford's career in the House, the better chamber. He took a demotion some years later to go to the Senate, but was Republican policy chair in 2013, 2014 elected to the Senate, and now you're the chair of the Senate Ethics Committee, vice chair of the Senate Republican Conference, and in addition to ethics, you're on finance, homeland security, intelligence. That's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, you have a lot going on. Well, let's talk about the issues of the day. There's a lot.
Is there stuff going on today?
There is stuff going on today. There's a few things going on. So let's start with something that's not going on today, which is reconciliation. You were elected for the first time in a class that I would say, to be honest with you, ushered in some of the calls for fiscal restraint that we see now. That was probably the beginning of the curve.
Yeah.
The curve has gone up, down, and sideways since then. 36 trillion in debt we are today. Right. The House included in its reconciliation bill, remember that's the package that will have all of the Trump policy agenda effectively, 1.5 trillion in spending cuts. I think I've heard from some Senate Republican folks that the biggest cut in a reconciliation bill is $400 billion historically.
Ever.
Right. That's a lot less than 1.5 trillion. I'm not great at math.
Apparently we're not either.
Yeah, you're not that good. You're not that good at math either, right? So tell me, like, what is you're sitting here now, we're March 11th, with two different paths. You have the House's big reconciliation bill. You have your narrow reconciliation bill. Tell me what you think is going to happen.
Yeah, we'll probably do a big reconciliation bill, try to be able to pull the two things together. I think the Senate was bringing something forward to saying if the House can't get something moving, we've got to get something going.
Yep.
So we got to get some funding for border security. We got to get some funding for national defense. There's some things we can get done that are quote unquote the low-hanging fruit of this. Yeah. But the tax policy is the challenge. Anyone who's actually been around trying to be able to write tax policy, it's incredibly complicated. And the fear is that as the House walks into this, of the, let's say, 220 members or so that will vote for a reconciliation bill, only 80 of them have ever voted on a tax bill ever in their entire congressional history. So only a third of that group that will be voting for it has ever dealt with tax before and really understands how incredibly difficult this really is. And so the challenge that we had on the Senate-House side was let's move what we can move now because this may take longer and the tax piece has to be done. In fact, I would say it has to be done in second quarter because every business, every small business, they've got to all do the planning. IRS has got to be able to lay out all the regulations for it in third and fourth quarter or we lose an entire year.
Now, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Second quarter would be April, May, June.
Yeah, okay, well, let's slip a little bit into July. Let's say it's before the August recess.
Okay, I think that's even hopeful.
Ambitious, yeah.
Yeah, it's very ambitious. I think part of the problem, and you were in the Senate during the last reconciliation, the last tax reconciliation bill during the first Trump presidency, that you had Obamacare repeal fail first, and then you took, I think President Trump signed the tax bill into law sometime in mid-December, after a very long process. So I mean, I think, yeah. So you think by August recess, effectively?
I think it's better to be able to do it by the time you get to an August recess, so you've got time to be able to roll out regs. I think people in Congress forget that when we pass a law, it's not done. Everyone says, well, how do you apply that in my situation? That's got to be Treasury and IRS given the regs for that. And that takes them time to be able to roll it out. I go back to 2011, you talked about that time period. In 2011, in December, it's like 28th or 29th of December, we passed a payroll tax bill that actually went to April of the next year. It was a nightmare scenario on that.
Boehner kept you in Washington. Were you on the conference committee?
I was not on the conference committee on that one in particular, but I was the freshman all complaining and saying, I haven't been here very long, but every CPA in America is going to hate us that we're changing tax in late December, and it doesn't follow the quarter system. It goes until April. And everyone kind of nodded their head and said, yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, I remember that. Boehner kept you basically over Christmas to get that done. Now, the House's bill included so not only 1.5 trillion in spending cuts, $880 billion in cuts under the Energy and Commerce Committee's jurisdiction. That is not $880 billion in Medicaid cuts.
Right.
It's not. But CBO, which is, I consider to be a pretty honest operator. Maybe, I know a lot of Republicans don't, but whatever, we don't have to get into that. They have said you can't cut that money unless there's significant Medicaid cuts from the Energy and Commerce Committee's jurisdiction. Now, Medicaid is a much more all-encompassing, let's say, program than it was even 15 years ago. I mean,
with the expansion, right?
Yeah, it's been expanded. A lot of folks are on it. I wonder how you think about something to the magnitude of several $100 billion in cuts to Medicaid.
Yeah, so let me take some
And you
pieces
are
of
on
it.
Senate
That's
Finance.
Right. That's
so
right. I'm on Senate Finance.
You
We deal
think
with
about
this. It's exactly right. So that's Energy and Commerce on the House side, but that's Senate Finance
Yes,
on
it's a
our
weird-
side of the
weird
building.
thing.
So yeah, the way it breaks out. So no one's talking about benefit cuts at all. I literally have not heard anyone actually bring anything up on benefits. The issue is CBO and the Government Accountability, GAO, they come out year after year and say there's $50 billion in funds that are either fraud, that are a waste, or improper payments. We don't know. We've never had a serious work to be able to deal with some of that. That's $50 billion that are going out the door that we don't know where they go. We've got two other features that are sitting out there. One of them is states like mine is one of them that's included on this. We have what we call a provider tax. If you want more federal dollars coming in, the state is supposed to kick more dollars in to say if the state puts more in, then the federal government puts more dollars in. Well, the states will work with the hospitals and will say, well, if you will give us more money, then we'll call that a provider tax. We'll call it our state portion. We'll send that over, and then the hospital actually gets more money. So it's not hard for them to give 50 cents to get a dollar back.
Right.
And well, that's gaming the system, because what that does, that actually increases the federal dollars that are coming down on that. So that's been out there for a very long time to say, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to continue to ignore the states that do that or not? Now, the hospital groups all say, well, that's the way for us to get more Medicaid dollars down. We all know it's a game that's being played on that. The third piece of this that's been unaddressed is with the Affordable Care Act. When it passed, it did, the Medicaid expansion was a 90% match. Most every other state somewhere between 50 to 65% match on it for the federal dollars. So literally the healthy expansion is at a much higher rate than it is for the blind and the disabled. So we've got to look at that at some point. Now, that doesn't mean that's a total change, but those are three obvious areas of saying, what are we going to do with Medicaid to be able to make sure we're preserving this program, we're maintaining the beneficiaries that are in, but we're also trying to be able to say, quite frankly, to states, the federal government has a $36 trillion budget gap right now, hole in our debt. Most states have a rainy day fund.
But I mean,
so how do we balance that out?
You've been around. You used to be able to get away back in the early 2010s with saying, I'm not a politician. I just came from, you know, you can't do that anymore.
No.
So you understand the political game quite well. When you start messing around with, even if it's not benefit cuts, when you start messing around with entitlements, we saw you lived through 2012. You lived through the Paul Ryan era. It's really.
I did a little bit on immigration.
You did. Yeah. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to immigration. Yeah. You know what happens. I mean, it's tricky. It's tricky, and you guys haven't really had the courage in the last decade or so to really tackle entitlements. And Trump doesn't want to touch Medicare. He doesn't want to touch Social Security.
Right.
He's not interested in some of those fundamentals.
He is interested in going after fraud. He is interested in going after things that you said. This is definitely gaming the system on it. He is interested in that. He's voiced that. He's been very clear on that. Obviously, that's been a little side hustle for DOJ to be able to focus on areas where there's waste that's going through the system. So we'll all have to have this conversation, try to figure out what that means. Obviously, you're not going to do the whole thing just on going after improper payments on Medicaid. You can't do that. There's just not enough dollars that are there on it. But again, with the $2 trillion overspending this year, you do have to ask the question, are we going to keep doing $2 trillion in overspending? At what point we can't do that anymore?
Yes, that's right. You come from a state with a tremendous amount of oil and gas production, with agriculture, with all sorts of industries that are very interested in the tax bill. What are your must-haves? Like, what are you focused on the most, aside from the obvious, right? The corporate rate, the individual. What are you focused on the most when it comes to reconciliation?
Yeah, first big piece for me is the bonus depreciation piece of this.
Which to explain allows, you could explain.
Well, so yeah, let me walk it through. So a company has to decide when they're going to get a chance to be able to write things off. Right now, if you have what's called 100% expensing, when I buy a big capital expense like this fabulous TV, okay? So if you were to buy that, which I can't afford, but yeah, it's a loaner. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you were to buy that for the company that does own it, if they were to buy it, that's a big capital expense. The issue is, can they expense it off that year, or do they have to expense it off multiple years? The taxes come in exactly the same. They're going to pay tax on it, but it's when do they pay tax on it? When do they get a chance to be able to write that off? Bonus depreciation says you can buy it off in the year that you actually purchased it, which is best for the economy, because then you can write off that expense, and then next year if you have another expense, you can write that off as well. It has more purchasing, more economic activity. The manufacturer of this big fabulous unit is very happy that somebody else is buying the next one, and it keeps the economy rolling. It's not a partisan issue on that. That's been diminishing since 2017. It's getting smaller every single year, which incentivizes less purchasing for large products.
And that's how you guys in Congress do tax bills, is that these things kind of phase out of it.
Correct. Well, the way CBO scores this, and it goes back to the CBO frustration, taxes will come in. They'll either come in this year, next year, the next year, the next year, or maybe the 10th, 11th, 12th year. CBO doesn't score that 10th, 11th, 12th year. So if you do bonus depreciation, they said you can't count the later years because it's not assumed in the 10-year scoring it's going to come in. So you get these games with CBO that everyone says the tax is actually coming in. It's just not coming in within the budget window that they can actually count. So it comes up with a $200 billion score. Well, it's not real. Everyone knows it's not real, but it's not within the 10-year budget window, so it becomes a fight. So we do have to resolve that, and what I'm trying to do is to make sure that's locked. It doesn't have a diminishing amount. Businesses can predict what they're going to be able to do in tax policy. That
Buying a
stability
tractor,
helps.
you know you could write the track, right. Okay, so that's policy issue number one. What else do you have?
So I'm actually also working on charitable. This has been a big issue for me as well. 2017, we did away with most folks being tax-exempt nonprofits. As far as the donation. We've heard the term over and over again. This is tax-deductible nonprofit donation. Well, that's only true for 9% of Americans now. The other 91% of Americans that don't itemize on their taxes, they actually can't write off a tax-deductible nonprofit donation on that because we doubled the standard deduction. Everybody glazing over yet on tax policy?
No, this is
so much fun when you get in the finance committee to go through tax policy. So I want to incentivize small dollar donations to nonprofits. America has three safety nets. The first safety net is the family. The second safety net are churches, faith-based groups, nonprofits. The third safety net is government. And if the government's going to try to carry everything in the safety net, government will never, ever be able to keep up. We've got to have strong families. We've got to have strong nonprofits. Those nonprofits take care of the hungry and the hurting and the homeless far better than government does. So incentivizing more small dollar donations to go into those nonprofits not only helps them financially and protects our safety net across the country, but it helps those nonprofits find their next volunteer. The next volunteer for a nonprofit is not your big dollar donor.
Right.
It's not. It's the small dollar donor that gives $25 that then they get an email saying, hey, would you come help us this weekend? And they do.
So one other question I want to ask you is about the House Republicans seem to be on the donation front, ancillary to this, is want to raise taxes on university endowments.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And I think they would, in theory, exempt religious institutions. So a Notre Dame, which has representation on the Ways and Means Committee from Rudy Yocum, who represents the South Bend area. Funny how that works, but no, I mean, this gets to a larger issue here, which is not everybody, most people, many members have universities in their districts, and universities are not going to be happy to see their endowment. I think it's at 3% now, and they want to bring it to.
Yeah, it's about, if I'm remembering, it's like 1.36% or something. It used to be at 2%, but then there was a formula that was changed in the 2017 and just did across the board smaller amount.
So where are you on this?
So we've not determined on that. I know we've watched the House talk about a lot.
Have you determined?
I have not. we do need to have a stable amount. You can't get to like a 21%. That's not rational to try to get to that. Then you're disincentivizing coming. The frustration for the endowments have been the size of some of the endowments, multi-billion-dollar endowments, that then they continue to get American tax dollars to do the next thing at their university, and it's still $50,000 to attend as a student.
Right.
And the frustration is, hold on, where is this $5 billion endowment going towards? What's it actually trying to
private equity
accomplish?
firms?
Correct. So
Yeah.
the challenge that we
That's
have
the
is we're
complaint.
looking at this and saying it doesn't seem to be going towards the student. It doesn't seem to be going towards the benefit of the country. That seems to be a increasing profit-based something that needs to be taxed.
No, the president has said he wants a whole range of tax cuts. I talked about this with two folks from the White House earlier today. Social Security benefits, tip wages, overtime, domestic manufacturers, deductibility on car loans. There are a lot more. I don't want to.
Car loans if they buy it in America.
If they buy it in America, I keep screwing that up. Yes, if they buy it in America only. Since we only have 7.5 minutes left, I don't want to list the rest of the tax cuts. At some point, you got to tax something, right? I mean,
Yeah, correct.
So, like, where do you?
Yeah, death and taxes are still a reality.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I would love to not pay taxes.
yeah.
It's not an
I'd love
option.
to not die. So,
Yeah.
so both of them. But neither of those are going to actually change.
Right, correct.
So, yeah, we do have to have income. We still have an enormous hole that's sitting out there.
So, is it possible to do all these things?
Well, it depends on how you define all these things and what that looks like. For instance, tax on tips. How many people are included in tips? How large is that? Is that if you make $200,000 a year or whatever it may be, and you're still writing tip income off? What does that actually look like? What's a tip? As folks that follow tax policy know, the vast majority of the big fat tax book is defining what income means.
Right.
So we've got the same thing. We now have to define what tip means because there'll be a lot of folks that will say, well, listen, only 10% of what I do is income. The rest of I do is a tip.
You could see people at
Okay.
hedge funds and private equity
Correct.
firms take money in tips. Or at law firms or anything.
You're not saying hedge fund guys may
I'm not
try to
saying
game
anything.
some of the tax policy.
I don't say anything
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Job creators. Right.
But I'm just, I look at all those things and say, those are all things that people would say, yes, I'm frustrated with that. Social Security is a big one. For people that also work part-time, even when they're retired, they get really mad when they're paying tax on their Social Security. I completely understand that.
For sure, I
The
hear that
challenge
too.
is, at what point is this additional income that we need to be able to also have income on?
That's right. Okay, I want to get to a few more topics. I want to get to the CR, but I want to talk about Doge, which you're a big supporter of,
Yeah.
the Elon Musk-led effort. You know, Congress has responsibilities. Congress has the power of the purse. I just wonder how you, not justify, but how you view the Doge effort. Is he an outside consultant? Is he an advisor? I mean, where does he fit in the government that we've known for so
He is
long?
currently leading the United States Department of Digital Services.
You understand the irony in this whole
I
thing.
know, I get it. So U.S. That digital services group was actually stood up under the Affordable Care Act when
Under
there was
Obama,
a huge
yep.
collapse of that structure, and to say, okay, we've got to find some way to be better at digital, and so he's now the digital guy. I love that he's wearing the tech support shirt walking around on it. So there's two things I would say on this. One is, I don't meet someone in Oklahoma that thinks the federal government's efficient. Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter. Everyone thinks we're terribly inefficient, waste tons of tax dollars.
Are there Democrats still in Oklahoma?
There are still Democrats in Oklahoma, and they introduce themselves to me often when we get a chance to be able
When
to
you're
chit-chat.
eating dinner with your wife?
That's exactly right. So, and that's great. We have great conversation on that. So everyone thinks we're inefficient. So let's figure out a way to be more efficient on that. I've put out the federal fumble book year after year after year of finding areas of inefficiency, saying everybody sees this as a waste. Why don't we fix this? So if the Treasury, for instance, is not actually listing where their dollars are going, well, that's a problem. Literally, Treasury is there to be able to help people follow the money. If you can't follow the money with their accounting system, that's a problem. Doge is stepping in and saying, why are there no account numbers that are here? Flip side of that is, when someone announces randomly that the lease is going to be canceled at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Muskogee, Oklahoma, which happened 2 weeks ago, I raise my hand and say, where do you want the U.S. attorneys to go? What secure space are you going to find in Muskogee, Oklahoma that fits that definition of what they're going to need for security?
Is that Tom Cole's district?
That is actually not. That's actually a little bit farther east of there. But we raised our hand and said, you can't cancel that lease. And everybody said, oops, we can't cancel that lease. And so they didn't on that. The same thing, we've had folks that are from DOD that they're saying, they're misunderstanding, quite frankly, where things are going, saying we're doing a hiring freeze. And so for term employees, that is their contract renews, they're just saying, well, we can't renew contracts. DOJ is saying that's not what we meant. Other folks that are applying it are saying, well, that's a rehire if we extend a term employee for a new year on it.
So you can see how this is confusing to people.
And it is completely confusing. They're going fast breaking things in the process and trying to be able to fix the thing that they broke, but their focus is forward.
Okay, I'm not, okay, let's leave.
The issue is the way, here's what I would say. Somebody tried to describe to me the other day that the American people overwhelmingly across the country are still happy that we're taking on fraud and waste and abuse. At the same time, if they have a family member or a friend that they're suddenly don't know if their job's going to be there, they're like, yeah, but we want to take care of them. The illustration that I have on it is like driving cross country with your kids to go to Disney World. We're all headed to Disney World. We're all happy about where we're heading, but the kids are going crazy in the back seat. So Dad pulls the car over and says, "We're not going to Disney World until everything gets all cleaned up here."
That's my play all the time.
Okay,
yes,
okay.
I do that,
So
yeah.
that whole emotion, that's where the country is right now. It's like we want to get there, but I want to pull the car over right now because they clean this up, but I want to get to that spot. We're in this weird emotion, I think, as a country, thinking we've got to be able to solve the waste and fraud and loss and inefficiencies. So they're just on full on, okay, we're going to solve it this week.
So Tom Cole, who's I think the dean of your delegation, the most senior member of your delegation.
Actually, Frank Lucas.
Frank Lucas, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's close, though.
Tom Cole's the second ranked.
Yep, he would be.
Republican member of the Oklahoma delegation. He said, and he's the appropriations chair, he said to me and a bunch of other reporters last week, no one is going to tell me what buildings to shut in my district.
Right.
That's for me to
it is.
have.
Yeah.
They can't do that without my input. And I
Right.
think that's a tricky.
It's fair.
It's a fair, yeah.
And it's one of the things you're finding the cabinet secretaries are saying, okay, no one lays off people. I'm now leading this area. 3 weeks ago, there wasn't a cabinet secretary. Now there is. I got it on it. And it's the same thing that I have said to a lot of the different folks that are within the White House and within the DOJ team. Hey, we want to help you. I can identify a lot of areas of waste on it, but I can also tell you, we do need a U.S. Attorney's Office in Muskogee. Okay, so let us help you avoid some of the potholes in this because we need to deal with waste, but we need to also still do basic government services.
Two more questions, and we're quickly running out of time. I want to ask you, let me do this in a lightning round, so to speak. CR, you think passes the House today?
I do. I think it passes the House today. I think it comes to the Senate. I think we're done by Thursday night late on it.
Okay, that's hopeful.
Well, I am hopeful on it. Quite frankly, government workers right now around the country don't need one more destabilizing thing.
Yeah. Speaking of destabilizing, the stock market is quite destabilizing.
I noticed.
Right now. Yeah. I mean, I think it was down 800 points yesterday. It was when I was looking on my computer.
I think it was actually 900 yesterday.
Okay, 900 yesterday. Well, okay.
Yeah. Even worse.
Maybe I'm never retiring, but who wants to retire? I don't want to retire.
Too young to retire.
I am too young to retire.
You can come to the Senate. You're still like a young guy if you came to the Senate.
I'd be an assistant.
Yeah.
The tariff stuff. Trump announced new tariffs today on Canada. Yeah. There's back and forth over energy into the United States from Canada. Like, what is going on here? I mean, are you okay with the stock market dropping this precipitously?
No one is. Obviously, anyone who's invested in the stock market any length of time or around it, they know we got up and down, we got corrections. All that's normal on it. What's not normal right now is that people don't know where to invest and where things are going. Lots of companies have production or relationships they're selling to or buying from Canada, and they just want to know what the rules are. Set the rules. I just want to know what the rules are. President Trump's trying to engage right now. Obviously, we have USMCA renegotiation. It's a 5-year renegotiation that's up later on this year.
Seems like he's getting a jump start on it.
He's laying the predicate down to say when we renegotiate this, there's some things we need to deal with, starting with dairy tariffs, the dairy limitations out there, softwood lumber, some of those things. He's talking about fentanyl coming into the United States. At the same time, he's laying a predicate down. We got to deal with some of these other areas that have been frustrating for Americans for a long time.
Okay, let's talk quickly. You alluded to this, and I want to keep this quick, or else Anna's going to come out and scream at me. Immigration.
Very rude. That would be very rude.
No, she's the boss. Immigration is something you famously spent a lot of time on last Congress, trying to get a bipartisan deal with the likes of Chris Murphy and a whole host of other Democrats. Trump killed that. You've reflected a lot on that episode in the last couple of years. I want to ask you the same question I asked James Braid and James Blair from the White House earlier, which is, What is the future of immigration reform on Capitol Hill? I mean, the president seems at this moment to be okay. Border crossings are pretty dramatically down right now. What's the future? What's next?
So there's twofold here. What I was trying to work on a year and a half ago was, and if I can just be frank, this is going to sound partisan, but just being frank, at the time, President Biden didn't want to engage on this. In fact, when Chris Murphy and Kirsten Sinema and I started this process, the White House literally said, we're not going to get involved at all. And the term was, we're not putting fingerprints on this, we're not involved.
Well, it probably would have been helpful with Republicans in some respect, but anyway.
Yeah, it would have. But the whole frustration at that time was we need the White House to actually engage on this. Once we got into October, November, December of 2023, December of 2023, we forget, was the highest number of illegal crossings in the history of the country. We had 12,000 people a day illegally crossing the border, a day during that December. During that time period, the White House came to us and said, okay, we'll start engaging. Okay, well, that was helpful to be able to have them at the table, but we were literally trying to move a White House that didn't want to acknowledge there was even a problem. Now we have less than 200 people illegally crossing a day. From 12,000 a day to less than 200, that's pretty dramatic with the exact same law. So what I was trying to do with that was to push the White House to the table and say, let's actually enforce the law. At the same time, fix the loopholes, because there are still loopholes in the asylum law. Mm-hmm. At some point, we got to be able to resolve that. And we will, at some point, to be able to resolve that.
You don't think this Congress?
I don't think this year, and I'm not even sure it will even be addressed next year. It may be in year 3 under a Trump presidency, because remember, the president, even on election night, which by that time was election morning, I guess, he came out in his speech and said, we need more legal immigration in the country.
Which he hadn't said the first term.
Correct, but we're talking election night.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so it was a pretty big statement to right off the bat talk about it. His first sit-down interview that he did with Kristen Welker, he talks about DACA. And I want to have DACA. I want to be able to get that resolved. They've been here a long time. I think that surprised a lot of people. It didn't surprise me, because I've heard the president make those statements multiple times in private. And if you'll watch his speeches, he'll talk about it other times as well.
He almost, I mean, and we got to wrap up because I'm really over time, but he almost, if you remember back in the first term, he had this big White House meeting with senators and was lining up with Dianne Feinstein on some issues on immigration. Yeah. So he is a pretty blank slate when it comes to changes to the
He will. In his White House and the team that's around him don't all agree on that, but he does. He's running it. And I think at some point he'll come back and say it's time we deal with some of these other issues as well.
James Lankford, Republican Senator from Oklahoma. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Jack.
Thanks.